It's another edition of PM Express, and my name is Martha Crenshaw Aqua. Today we're talking about welfare policy, but we're talking about it in relation to a vulnerable group in society. Now, we see children everywhere. As you move around town, you see them exposed to one danger or the other, and you wonder who is responsible for this child. Is it the state? Is it a parent? Is it a community? Or we should just ignore them? I wonder every day. But today, the Ministry for Gender and Social Protection took a very bold step by launching a policy, a welfare policy that will take care of some of these issues. And we are going to talk about it. Hopefully, by the time we're done, you understand it and know your role in making this work. Welcome to PM Express, and I'm Martha Crenshaw Aqua again. I'm not doing this alone. I have been joined in the studio by Charles Othniel Abe, who is with the African Development Program. He is the head of programs. Welcome to PM Express.
Thank you, Martha.
And I'm also privileged to have Edmond Foley, who is a technical advisor for children at the Gender and Social Protection Ministry.
Thank you, Martha.
Welcome to PM Express.
Thank you.
What does this policy mean in summary?
In summary, I'll give you 3 Ps, as I said today at the launch. It is first to promote the well-being of children. It is to prevent abuse and exploitation of children. And thirdly, it is to ensure that we better protect children. So it's promote, prevent, and protect. Essentially, that is what this policy is seeking to do.
What it means is we are doing some kind of protection. But if you say to better protect, it means we are not doing it as much as we want to do or we ought to do. What is different?
What is different? And since 2010, we began with a mapping exercise. Now, essentially, Ghana was the first country. We made history globally. We were the first to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And then 8 years later, we had our Children's Act. But if you look at our reporting to the United Nations system, as well as to the African human rights system, we have been questioned a number of times over the state of child protection. And also as a country, we had come to the point where we noticed child protection is one of our developmental goals. If you look at the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda, child protection is there. And so we needed to then see what child protection is like in Ghana. And the 2010 mapping exercise, and subsequently we did a comprehensive baseline research, revealed to us that, as you have said, there are very many good policies. The various sectors all have policies on children: health, education, even the local government service, considering that under the Children's Act, they have to set up the child panels. Everybody was moving in their own direction. There was no concerted national approach, hence the need to have a concerted approach. So you are right if you say we had some protection, but now we want to do it in a more harmonized manner.
And in harmonization,
right?
You're adding value, I guess, to it.
Yes, adding value, because what the research, the baseline research was also telling us is that the first port of call, mostly for children who find themselves in a situation where they need the assistance of the state structures, is first to go to those state structures. So you have recourse to social welfare. When children are in situations where they face violence, they go to the police. But these two sectors are often overtasked. And we have less than 3,000 social workers in Ghana for a population of 25 million, yes. However, if you look at the other side also, families, communities take care of children in any event, yes.
Most children,
yes, the primary caregivers. And they, in fact, address most of the child protection issues. If you take children deprived of a family environment, you find out that when they are not in the nuclear family, it's either an uncle they are staying with, a close relative. So you have kinship care in Ghana, that's what we call it, which is really at the grassroots. So we thought, why don't we find a way of integrating the system, which assists nearly 70% of children in Ghana, with the formal system, and try and have a more coherent structure with these two working together. That was really the rationale for taking a look at the child protection system and coming out with this new document.
Okay, Charles, I'm wondering how this policy is going to work in the first place and whether it will work at all, because you're very good at policies. But when it comes to implementation, I know Edmond may disagree with me, but I don't know what you think about that.
Good evening to your viewers, and thank you for having me on the show. And I'd want to congratulate the ministry for the steps taken. Indeed, for those of us in development practice, we are of the view that there's the need for better coordination and a concerted efforts in terms of policy making. So the ministry did well to revamp the sector working group, where it expanded the membership so that all states and allied institutions who have issues to do with social protection, we can better coordinate their efforts, which is a very good step, and I must commend the ministry for that. And beyond that, I'm sure that this thinking of harmonizing issues relating to child welfare is in the right direction, because already at the national level, we have taken steps to have a social protection policy. So it is in line with the current paradigm as far as evidence-based policy and implementation is concerned. And you ask a very important issue as far as translating those policies into the reality on the ground. I'm sure as this document is now open to the public, we'll be able to question those issues. But a few things come to my mind straight away. First of all, given a population and housing census, our projections, we do know that the children under 15 years are almost 40% of our population. When you go behind these figures, you get to see that for the 3 northern regions, there is a relationship with the poverty levels, and you see that they have higher levels of children in terms of the age structure of the population. So you take northern region, upper east, upper west, and then Bronga halfway is next before central region. So you realize that these are the dynamics in terms of how our structure is looking like. Although the population and housing census makes us realize over the past years that the proportion of children is declining, they still represent the bulk of our population. So it's in the right direction when a government, for that matter, sees the need for us to do this. However, we ask ourselves, what is already happening in the system? Just some moments ago, I was drawing your attention to what is happening with the Garden City School for the Intellectually Disabled. You know that Multimedia and ADP and some institutions have been doing advocacy on their issues. I would want to see that a child protection and welfare policy as we interrogate those issues. Because all these years, they have been under the Ghana Education Service, and resource constraints have been an issue. Subvention, feeding grants, administrative grants has always been an issue. So whilst we already had existing institutional framework to better serve the needs of, and here we are talking of children with disabilities, and they are failing on their mandates, then, you know...
you ask yourself if this policy is going to... Because before I came on, I was having a conversation with a colleague who was telling me he's thinking the policy is designed for the safe in society. It's not going to really take care of those who actually need it, like this group we're talking about right now.
Exactly the point. So for me, I mean, we all watched the demolition exercises that was ongoing at the Old Fadama. Yes, the brute force of power had to go in there to go and eject it. But if we had all realized the very age-long definition of who an adult is, a child who has survived, we would have seen that before we went in there to start what we're doing, we would have taken the necessary measures to cater for these needs. So for me, it is a good step in the right direction. However, as we interrogate the issues, we want to see which institutional frameworks will be put in place to translate these ideas into the reality so that our children can have the better results out of the policy.
So Edmond, do you think we must start implementing this before we interrogate some of these issues? Or you have come up with some issues you've already addressed, and when we start implementing, obviously, it takes the implementation to know that there are loopholes. You can predict some of them, but it takes the implementation. How are you working around that?
As far as implementation is concerned, and very good points you've raised, Charles, I think they are very much in order. The policy was adopted by Cabinet on 15th February. But already from December last year, we're nearly completing the operational plan, the implementation plan, in that we wanted the various sectors to include them in their sector working plans already. So some have. The Ministry of Gender, for instance, this has been worked into the plan of all the institutions concerned. And one of the things you see coming out is that we are almost done with our National Targeting Office, whose purpose is actually to identify some of the most vulnerable groups. One of the things the policy document speaks to is identifying children and families who are most vulnerable.
Okay.
So particularly
we
then
need to
for
define that one, most vulnerable.
who are most vulnerable, yes. And that comes into the function of that targeting office. It's no easy exercise, but some people have I would say, for want of a better term, not from a very scientific perspective, but say, if you look at the population of Ghana, nearly 70% need social protection.
Okay.
Yes, because of levels of poverty and all of that. So definitely the ministry has a huge task, and even as a country, making those definitions of who is vulnerable and who needs assistance are critical
because
questions.
we have seen or heard about
Yes.
people who are on leave who are actually not supposed to be on leave. And so I expect that we are going to have that problem with this one as well. But we have the structures to deal with it, or
yes.
you're not going to put structures in place.
The structures are there, and the key structures we are working with, we say the family and the community structures.
Okay.
And if you look at the early pages of the document where you have the definition of the concepts, we had quite a bit of a task having to unpack what do we mean by family, what do we mean by community, and even translating that understanding into a structure which will work with this policy. So the feedback from the bulk of Ghanaians we consulted is that let family also include extended family. But then who has even responsibility over the family? People talked about within the community. Let us look at opinion leaders. Let us look at people like assembly members. I was in the Volta region during the consultations, and the community pointed to an assembly member who they look up to in these matters and say he has a lot of interest in children. We talk of the chiefs, and we had a lot of discussions with the National House of Chiefs on this document in Kumasi. The Queen Mothers also. What we expect, let's take a very practical scenario. What we are expecting moving forward is that, say a child is assaulted brutally in the home. Previously, you may have gone to, let's take a village far off. Yesterday, I spoke to a radio station in Goso, for instance. It said, far off in Goso, what do? There's no social worker here. We expect that the chief in the town or whichever community leader there is, or even somebody, we say a responsible adult in the house who witnesses such a thing going on, or even a child who sees this thing going on, report to such a person. Take the child and offer the child refuge first. We want that change in attitude, rather than leave the child still in the environment
where...
where...
the fact that you have recognized there is a change in attitude, because I see us moving
there should
away.
Be. Yes.
We have moved away from the extended family taking care of each other and the vulnerable, and we have now moved to the nuclear side. So your business is your business, my business is my business. And so you see the next door neighbor who you can be related to battering the child, and you have no say whatsoever. It's a community, it's a family, but you can't say anything. It's their business. So I feel we have lost our chain, the chain in the family system, and that's going to pose some difficulty. It means you're not going to do this all over again.
Admittedly, and it is going back to, it's that Sankofa. This morning at the lunch, the two children who recited the poems, the theme of that poem was that gone were the days when, as they said, Mukusani. Yes, someone's matter, was the other person's matter. And we're going back to that concept. Essentially, that's what this policy is trying to get us to do, to go back there. But how do we ensure that it is also structured? We expect that when we have such people making these interventions, say you have a chief or a queen mother giving the child refuge, then they have recourse to the state institutions when sort of the matter is beyond them. And I've been explaining that this policy is not then going to sanction, for instance, discussing rape matters at home. No. Still have the matter reported to the... Yes, let's be very clear on that. This is not going to say, as the Fantis will say, let us discuss this matter at home. No. Have recourse to the state agencies who have to take responsibility. So a child is defiled, report the matter to the police. However, we admittedly do not have enough psychosocial support, state-sponsored psychosocial support for this child. However, there are responsible adults in the community who could help give this child some refuge, get this child back to what they were before. This is what we are calling on these persons to do. But it needs some guidance.
Yes,
so as
does.
you have
Seriously.
recourse to these measures, then have the state agencies responsible so that the social worker, for instance, is not too burdened with
how many of them do we even have to
exactly
burden
directly
them?
responding to each issue, but also following up that, oh, in this community this happened, I am aware of it, and these are the steps being taken by people in the community to resolve
We'll
those
talk
issues.
more about the social worker, but Charles.
Martha, I wanted to make some comments related to the macro environment as far as this policy is concerned, as we delve into the details of it. My worry is the timing of this policy. In the fact that, you know, as a country, our outlook and projections is into the medium term. Now, we know that the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda is to span 2014-2017, for which reason sector ministries will then translate whatever it is into their, sector working plans, and then budgetary allocations are put forward. Now that, as far as we know, the GSGD2 is almost done and dusted, and then a child welfare policy pops up in the medium term, then all things being equal, without sounding prophetic, I don't see where we would have those budgetary resources to actually realize what an implementation plan would do to accompany a child welfare policy. More so when we are under an IMF program. And for me, if we look at our budgetary issues as far as the ministry is concerned, yes, in terms of nominal figures, the ministry seems to be having some amount of money from allocated from finance ministry, but its real value, we know, in terms of macroeconomic issues, also to a large extent, you know, inhibits effective implementation. So within the macro environment, the timing of it is something that, yes, to all intents and purposes, I don't want to believe that the minister having reported at the UN that, yes, Ghana was in the process, and then, you know, we want to flag this, hey, we've done it, you know, so that the whole world will see that we have done it.
Is that what it is?
But,
no, we actually reported it was done.
Yes, I get the part that, yes, hey, we have done it, but I'm saying that at the time that now we have a child and family welfare policy, how, especially when we have concluded the medium-term fiscal planning space as far as budgetary allocations are concerned, when would an implementation plan accompanying a policy get the necessary funding when, in my view, the window is almost closed as far as getting it translated into a sector plan to get Minister of Finance approval for budgetary provisions to implement the policy?
Have you made allocations for it already?
Right. One of the things that we often don't see, I mean, with doing policies like this, is that you don't often get a very well-costed plan. So one of the things happening to the implementation plan is a costing, so that already Parliament has a sense of what this is going to involve and then make the necessary allocations. But one of the sixth strategic objective is in the policy is mooting for adequate resources. Admittedly, you are right, and the minister has made no bones about it. If you look at the social protection budget, it's one of the least. We are hovering around 1%. And like I said, looking at the country's population in need of social protection, including children, then we ought to up our game. So one of the things under this policy is to trigger that advocacy for more resources. And it's what we are going to push for.
Are we not
resources,
going to do that?
Resources not only for, we've already started, not only for this policy, but for child protection in general in the country.
Mr. Foley, sorry to come in at this point, but once you are coming from the ministry, the issue for me, as far as resource provision is concerned, is it's as much as a political decision.
Granted, yes.
So that I would expect from where I sit that government that projects itself as a social democratic government in terms of political ideology and thinking would put its money where its mouth is, as we literally say. Because if if you lean to the social democratic ideology, then you expect that state-led support systems are provided for. And it is a political decision to say that, look, for us as a country, we identify and we are doing that. But for me, I mean, and I'm sure many more Ghanaians, the events or examples we have doesn't inspire that confidence. Because if I scan the social development sector for the past 6 years under a social democratic government, where funding is supposed to go, how many times Joy News hasn't carried news items on LEAP grants delaying?
Yes.
How many times haven't we on school feeding? How many times haven't we done even on special schools? So consistently, it looks like, I mean, that's the order of the day. And I don't see how much advocacy we would have to do to get them to do it.
We'll get Mr. Foley to answer all that. We just need to take a break so Mr. Foley can put his thoughts together, and we'll come back and talk about the child welfare policy. We're still on PM Express, and we're talking child welfare policy. Before we took the break, you realized Charles was on heat, talking so much about what he expects and has not seen yet, and wondering if this will work. But Mr. Foley.
Yes. No, the points Charles makes are valid, but then there's a starting point. We may, over the years, not have paid much attention to social protection and our budgeting, but as you mentioned, we already have the social protection policy in place. We are adding this one on children. And from our recent interaction with the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, these matters were placed before, as a country, that we need to improve the way in which we approach child protection, social protection issues. So for us as a ministry, this is a starting point. And even the fact that we had taken time to go around the country, and I tell you from some of the interactions, we faced some very tough questions.
I wanted you to mention some of the things that came up.
One gentleman came up and said, look, I have 3 daughters. Look at my state. If you see as I'm standing here, it is not possible for me to take care of these 3 children. However, somebody has come forward and says, I want to marry one of your daughters.
How old is that daughter?
The daughter is definitely under 18 years. And he didn't say, but it says one of my daughters, and has promised to take her to school. What do I do? It's the only way my daughter can get an education, and so I have to agree. Our difficulty is getting this man to understand that first you have a responsibility to take care of your child. Granted, we understand your poverty, whatever. But you must also do so in a context where you are sure of her safety and her security. What guarantee do you have that this man marrying her, that she'll be sent to school? And so we understood that social tussle. And one of the things we expect this policy to do is also to engineer some behavioral and attitudinal change in the way people think and approach these issues and search for solutions. Granted, I tell you, looking into that man's eyes with his situation, it was very difficult for him to think of any other options. But it is going to be a very painful surgical process.
So obviously, a man like this is not getting support from the extended family already. Because I assume if he cannot take care of these 3 daughters, he should first fall on the immediate family. But if he's not getting that, and we are building a policy that we're going to include this units, then we have a lot of work to do.
We do have a lot of work to do. And for such people, then to also get him to understand that do you have recourse first to this extended family system? Maybe he had, maybe he hadn't. He didn't go into much detail. But that is what we expect. You talked about the term limit for the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda. We're also hoping that one of the things this policy will do is sort of to spring from a certain national developmental agenda, but then also to be forward-looking. And so this process whereby sometimes we, it's truncated because one thing is ended, what the GSGDA expects us to do is put in place policies. So it doesn't necessarily say that let those policies end. And we are hoping that even as we change governments in our democratic space, such
policy can continue.
Such policy, documents. And to give you an example, if you look at the implementation plan, I'm sorry I don't have a copy here with me given the time rushing here, but if you take the law reform process, we estimated that if we have to amend the Children's Act, and we did inform the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. I keep referring to them because we recently reported, in May, to the committee. We gave the committee a timeline of 2019, considering that, and work has already started. In fact, Cabinet has approved certain portions of the Children's Act to be amended. Has approved the amendments, particularly those on adoptions. Because children who are adopted, especially inter-country adoptions, are one type of vulnerable group who could be exposed to all kinds of things outside. So that work has started. And so 2019, GSGDA will be gone by 2017. But this has to continue. We can't stop the amendment of the Children's Act. And we expect that by 2019 it should have been fully amended to be in line with this.
I'm wondering what legal framework you have, but I know it's part of the plan, so you explain that for me. But if you look at this whole policy thing, I see, because I want to see it work before I actually call it a policy thing, because we are good at doing that, but the implementation may take, I don't know how long do you see this happening in the next 5 years?
I believe that given the
changing lives, impacting on the children,
we all have a role to play. And I'm happy Mr. Foley mentioned that they hope this will engineer some kind of debate for us all to look at what we need to do. I noted something down when we mentioned the immediate support system that is available to a family. I think here the media would have to up their game. Enough of the telenovelas. It's eroding the cultural and family support systems. It's the mind game, you know, because you
watch.
Exactly. You become what you watch, what you read, and all of that. Now, to the extent that we all say, oh, good old days gone by. Where did they go?
We swept them off.
We swept them off. So, please, I mean, and I know multimedia, you are always taking the leadership in some of these things. It's a challenge. Let us cut down on these telenovelas. And trust me, I was amazed when there is power outage, Mr. Foley, people want to carry their televisions and go and look for places to watch.
Yes.
So I mean, it gives you a sense as to what we are trading off.
We are addicted to it.
Yes, we are trading off those cultural and to a large extent, people then forget that we our makeup, we belong to families.
Yeah, different people. Our cultural values make us who we are.
And
but gradually,
for me, the ministry would have to up, and civil society will join. Will up that pressure on the media, and we know you respond. Now, when you have responded to this pressure on us to cut down the telenovelas and let us use
the time for the other things.
Good.
That will benefit us.
Good. Then now we can also hold the states in check for their responsibilities. And holding the states in check will mean that, look, so many years School of Social Work is not yet upgraded to a tertiary status. I know plans are afoot, but like they will say, plans are advanced, We don't have, he mentioned the number, the ratio, less than 3,000 social workers. And what are we waiting for? Because some of these things does not require so much of money to implement them. As we churn out a lot more of professional social workers, then we know that within a district, for instance, this man who came up with an issue, he knows that if he goes to the district assembly, there's a qualified social worker there. The social worker, per his training, knows that given the cultural settings we are in, when he interrogates him, he will be able to identify what social support systems are available for him to rely on before he even comes to the state.
At that level.
At that level.
Doesn't need to come straight to the state.
You understand? So then the social worker is able to do that work, and at that level, the problem is solved.
Okay.
Then when it is a higher order responsibility, he knows that it has to come to this level.
So it will move from district to the regional, and then before it gets to the national
the institutional
level.
holding and who is responsible for what is well clarified. The rules are performed. Okay. So for me, this engineering of discussion, this is some of the issues we must look at, and I would want to encourage that let's share lots more of the documents. Now I know where to be able to pick copies of the documents.
I'll donate these.
Thank you for donating. Thank you for donating on sets.
Yes. So you can't take it back when we are done.
You know, but at least from civil society, we can also engage the other social partners. So we know that, okay, for our religious leaders, I'm sure the church you belong to, my church, we have a welfare system.
Yes, I do too.
Yes.
Exactly. So how we tap into these things for each one of us to play our roles will help achieve this that we are looking for. Because as a country, where we say is our priority is where we should put our resources. And if we don't do those things, then we are joking.
We keep saying the children are the future, yet they are
the
least They are the now, not the future anymore.
They are the now, yes.
Okay.
They are the now.
So
40% of your population under 15, and what
if you
future are
don't
you
pay
talking
attention,
about?
we are destroying our now and our future together.
Exactly.
So we have no future at all.
don't.
Or what's the legal framework for this policy? What's the legal framework back
this policy is being developed under the aegis of the Constitution. If you look at our directive principles of state policy, we are not supposed to be stagnant. Policies and programs that advance the needs and the cause of vulnerable groups, women, children. You've seen the recent development in Parliament with the Property Rights of Spouses Bill, which, well, though late, better late than never. So we are doing those. Again, like I said, we have treaty obligations. The African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. There, when we have signed on to these documents, Article 1 and Article 2, respectively, of the two instruments, talk about the fact that we have to put in place measures using our resources to the maximum extent possible to realize the rights of the child. So this gives us the basis for undertaking this exercise.
All right. So when you look at one issue, one key issue I see every day is child neglect.
Yes.
What is the parameters in this policy for child neglect, for instance?
Within the policy, child neglect is one of those situations in which children are put at the risk of being exposed to violence, abuse, and harm. If you leave your child in a situation where they could be injured, they could starve, or any of those debilitating conditions, the policy is saying that we should empower families to understand these situations. I found 2 children at the traffic light by the National Theatre. They were nearly knocked down by a car. So everyone in traffic sort of held their heads, cried Jesus in their vehicles. I can imagine. I did. So I slowed down and interviewed those 2 children and asked them, what are you doing here? This was during the Christmas season, 2014. They said, our mother asked us to come and sell so that we could get something.
What age?
Give them 10 years and 12 years. There were 2 boys, brothers. We need to let such a mother understand. It's true, it's difficult.
You're not going to let the mother understand?
Perhaps let me say, this is now a wake-up call in this document to all of us, both players in the field directly and to all Ghanaians, neighbors, communities, to understand. We need to let this mother understand. It is true that you are in a difficult situation, but you let the children walk. They said they came from Aveno to National Theatre. Yes. So perhaps walking by the roadside, selling till they got there. Sometimes people, you might be surprised, genuinely think that this is okay. She may have sold when she was a child to make ends meet. So we have to find a way of also targeting and identifying such persons in our communities. We may know. I would say that from my technical expertise, working also across Africa, the poverty and the challenges we face on the continent make us often focus on the economics. It's fair and well, but we leave the sociology. And as Charles has been saying, understanding that aspect of our lives.
That doesn't seem to be our concern.
Exactly. It doesn't seem to be our concern, but we need to invest in it. And it's a very costly and painful exercise to do. It took the Scandinavian countries between 10 to 15 years to fully eradicate corporal punishment in all settings, school, home. It comes with changing attitudes and behaviors. Yes. So it is definitely going to be a tough exercise. Often the cost, the social cost, the economic cost is expensive. You may go and educate people in a community and they only enjoy your drinks and go back to do the same thing. But we need to keep at it. We need to keep at it because we will benefit in the end. An allied document to this policy would be a manual called the Communication for Development Manual, which has a strong component on societal behavioral attitudes towards child protection matters, so that we begin to change some of these.
This is going to be
attitudes.
A national agenda to change attitude.
Yes.
But if you are changing attitude, you must have structures in place. For instance, there is a woman who seems to be having mental challenges, and she has 4 children, 2 sets of twins. on the N1 begging for alms.
Yes.
Now, we got closer, we were talking to her, and she said, oh, one of the twin, the first, there will be 12 years, boys, was sent to a relative far away in the Western region to ensure the boy gets education. Now, this woman was begging on the streets of Accra, sending the money so the boy can get education. One day, she visited unannounced and saw that the boy wasn't going to school at all, but the auntie was using the money to take care of her children. Now, this mentally challenged woman took the child back to Accra, and they are begging on the N1. And she said she'd rather keep her children by her side and expose them to all the dangers rather than send them to a relative. Would you call this woman an insane woman?
It's a harrowing story. I think given if we were to open the phone lines for people to call into it, everybody would tell one story or the other. I have my own situation I encountered in 2010 on my way from Bogatanga to Accra in a Metro Mass Transit, and at the height of the Boko conflict. And here was this boy, I'll give him a text. He tells me he's in primary 4 at his age, and telling me he comes from a public primary school in Boku, and he could speak near impeccable English. I realized this is a boy of a future. But he was having an auntie who was in wheelchair, and he said that, I was with them on the stage. I'm like, where are you headed to? He's like, well, there's conflict in Boku, so I've left with my auntie. Where are you headed? He says, okay, we don't know where we are going, but we'll get to Kumasi first. There's a mosque, we'll stay there, and then after staying for some days,
Then
I was touched and I was grieved. And I'm like, goodness, where have we all gone wrong? And I'm looking forward to an implementation plan where some of the things that does not require so much money, but more dialogue engagement. If you look at our population setup, yes, we are a secular state, but we know that about 60% of our population are Christians. About 18 to 22% are Muslims. For these two major faiths, they have programs for the children in church. So there's Sunday school, there's the Adventists say they have Sabbath school, the Muslims have their Makranta. I'm expecting that the ministry, through its Department of Children and whatever institutional arrangements they have put in place, through this policy formulation, would have engaged the Children Ministry Department of almost every faith possible.
Okay.
You see, we were talking backstage about sampling. Then you were mentioning the good numbers you met.
7,000.
7,000. But given the kind of population dynamics we have and people professing one faith or another, if we have 85% of our people claiming to be one faith or another, then you would want to engage the churches and the faiths. They have children ministry departments. They should have been an active part in this policy formulation, where their roles are well clarified, such that these child protection, the 3 P's you talked about, some of these things will be ingrained in their children ministries at their churches.
Okay.
In Ghana, almost every Christian will go to church on a Saturday, on a Sunday. They are going there. So at least there is that interface and interaction happening all the time.
Becoming part of their life.
It is part of their life. So I've not seen the implementation plan yet, and we're asking about who and who were part of consultations to tighten the approach. But I would expect, if I don't see such an approach or a plan in the implementation plan, I'll be disappointed. Then, you know, we are not tightening the issues well, because, again, budgetary constraints will come. But I'm sure as even these children ministries of these churches and faiths have their programs running already, having reach out to them, it will be easier.
Yes.
And we can tap into their resources.
We can tap into
yes. In fact,
their
we are
resources.
one of the first groups, if you take the specific interest groups, the religious leaders were one of the first groups that we held consultations with, from both major faiths as well as even traditional religious leaders. I recall that in Accra we met with the Wulomo and some of the other leaders in the Ghana traditional council. They were present during the consultations. And I think, let's just mention quickly, for the traditional religious leaders and for traditional authorities also, one of the things coming out from the consultations with them was, as this policy grows and as we implement it, we also want this to help us in our own advocacy with other national structures, parliament and go on, defining our responsibilities. I recall one religious leader said, if we have to take up child protection issues, how do we sanction? And this is a traditional religious leader who also has responsibilities, more or less as a chief, and says, where are the lines? You say I should report to the police, but then also I should have some authority over my people. And how will the state recognize that? And they mentioned, particularly the chiefs and queen mothers mentioned, they have their own advocacy ongoing with the Ministry of Chieftaincy and with Parliament on better defining their roles and sort of the boundaries. What can they do that would be, for want of a better term, respected by the law? Because they say we play critical roles. So these were some of their concerns, which in the implementation, to answer Charles's concern, the state institutions, like the Department of Children, and you are right, we ought to interface with these bodies. And so one of the tasks, the roles for the Department of Children is ongoing research relating to child protection issues by other players in the field. So the Department of Children is supposed to follow up on these groups, like you were saying, find out what are their own child protection schemes. Is it aligned with the broad principles of the policy, ensuring non-discrimination and those things, and then report back? Are they even aware of the policy? Do they find it easy to work with? This would come in the annual policy review meetings that we expect to have in the tenure of this policy.
Let's now talk about challenges you face in the child protection area.
Yes.
Key challenges you face, because it's not smooth at all.
At all.
So many problems. It's so huge.
Yes, I'm sure Charles can tell you as well. Major one, societal attitudes, our own attitudes towards children, and social issues. Like I said, it's true, man needs bread and butter. We need to eat. So our preoccupation most of the time is with the survival, the daily survival. And so you think, why should I, and for most vulnerable parents, why should I take my child to a playground or something? I find that, you know, that kind of telenovela life, when the immediate issues are bread and butter for the children. But these are all part of what make up the child's total well-being and development.
I think an aspect we are not getting right is what we see as training for the child and what we see as exposure to danger.
Exactly.
I see a thin line between
child labor, major one. Like I said, the child must work and be a responsible adult, but then also
must learn to fend for himself. Yes,
you are placing the child in a situation of harm and danger. Then we have the issues around crime, the violence. I always say, when I worked on corporal punishment issues in South Africa, where I used to work, the story always starts out with a parent saying, I didn't intend harming my child this way, but see what I have done. And so they are moving away from incarcerating such a parent. They are force harm, all right, to reforming the parent. Can we put the person through some program to let them understand how they manage their own anger, things like that? So those are some of the things we hope.
The iron and burning the child for stealing.
We hope to learn. Yes, we hope to learn from some of these examples, so that the violence issues, the child trafficking, child labor, it's, and particularly for the girl child, the levels of sexual abuse are worrying.
We'll take a break here, and then when we come back, we'll talk more about how we can make this work for us. We're still talking child welfare policy here on PM Express, and I have those who can do the talking, and I'll do the listening and make contributions here and there on the issue. But we are hoping so far you've learned something, and the conversation will continue from here. Charles, if you look at the abuse girls suffer, most of them go unreported because you're protecting a family member, a neighbor, or you don't want finger pointing. You're saving the girl's dignity. This must work in this policy we have, don't you think?
It needs to, and I think that I'm happy Edmond identifies one of the institutional responsibilities of the traditional setup, because many a time there's a conflict where people would readily run to the traditional leadership or even the religious leadership and, you know, plead and try to get the matter settled. So I'm sure that as part of the implementation plan, in clarifying rules and delineating the extent to which people can go and cannot go, we are in a position to make sure that some of these things are sorted out. Whilst I'm in favor of us highlighting the issue of the girl child, my worry is sometimes we stand a risk of ignoring the boy child. Okay. Because even in our current the population dynamics we still have, within the 0 to 15 age group, we have more males than females.
Okay.
So,
0 to 15?
Yes. We have more males than females. So there are issues as well are serious. And I think that the judiciary sent a strong signal with the recent, you know, court's verdict on the sodomy issue.
That was yesterday.
Yes, that was yesterday. It was a very strong signal because here was a boy child involved. You understand? So for me, whilst we looked at the girl child issues, we also should not neglect the boy child issues. So yes, when these various institutional rules are well clarified, I know what I have to do as a traditional leader. I don't have to shield a family who comes and begs that, oh, maybe I send my or you know, and we allow things
we must deal with them the way they ought to be dealt with.
We have to deal with them. And also the states also must be seen to be exacting, you know, authority on these matters. So we
there are cases you see the states not being so interested in pursuing. And that leaves some activities.
And I'm sure that as part of the legal framework to fast-track some of these things, the attention of the Chief Justice and Judiciary will be brought to such that cases and matters that are brought before the courts, those that require ADRs to fast-track these things, because the ultimate is not about just administering justice on matters so that offenders will be dealt with and then victims will lead on their lives, but also rehabilitating and repairing whatever has been damaged so that they can get back to their normal life. So imagine a case running for like 6 to 8 months, and I mean,
when you are done, what happens to the victim?
What happens to the victim?
Is it taken care of in this policy? Rehabilitation.
Not fully. Rehabilitation, not fully. There is going to be a second policy aligned to this. By December, we hope that process would also be finished. That will be the Justice for Children policy.
Okay.
This speaks to, often when we make the distinction in our child rights discourse, this type of policy mostly addresses your key protection matters. Your Justice for Children policy sometimes is broader. It deals with children who are in conflict with the law, children who have committed offenses themselves, children who are in contact with the law, we say, for civil matters. So these are children who need some of the things Charles is talking about, your maintenance issues, your adoption issues. Then we have child victims and child witnesses, children who have witnessed crime, children who have to testify, children who are victims of crime, who need protection. Now the two policies are going to speak together. So what the Justice for Children policy seeks to do is to ensure that children get speedy justice. One of the recommendations that has come before the advisory committee is something that is done in Burundi. In Burundi, the court dockets of children are color-coded. So they are orange dockets. Yes, I found that on a study I undertook in Burundi. They are orange. And the idea is once a judge sees an orange docket in the park, pull it to the top. And it's working. Very cost-effective measure, and it is working. So we want to learn some of these things. The other thing we would have is a child support unit, which will look at the case of maintenance. It's a problem in our country. Men who are not paying. This is maintenance issues, yes. DOFSU has its mandate, violence victim support issues. Yes. Even SHRAJ. SHRAJ is doing a lot of maintenance cases, but that is not the core duty of SHRAJ. So we are looking at having that kind of institutional structure. And indeed, the judiciary have been very much on board with the justice policy, which will be aligned to this. And how it will speak to this is, in 1 second, is that then the psychosocial support that the child needs should be taken care of under this policy, so that if we can't get the state-sponsored services, then at least a family member or a community member can take in that child and give the child refuge.
Charles, your final words.
Well, so soon the time is up. Time could fly. I think that I agree with some of the things that my colleague has highlighted, a technical advisor on the justice issue. Again, a little worry is the fact that many a times when these policies are crafted and implementation plans are put in place, they also create their own new institutions that are required to actualize
Why
them.
not strengthen the existing ones?
So when you create these new institutions and already existing institutions are resource constrained, then you are adding on to the problem. So once we are human beings, these things will come. But for me, I would want to see more political will. We must put our money where our mouth is.
We must put our money where our mouth is. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on PM Express. And for you out there, when you see a child, take it as your responsibility to protect the child. Thank you for watching.